It's the show where Hawaii's newsmakers come to talk and to take your questions live. From the nation's capital to Honolulu Hale, from the state legislature to the fifth floor. We bring the experts to you and ask them what you want to know. Spotlight Hawaii with Yanji Denise and Ryan Pelesuji on the digital platforms of the Honolulu Star-Advertiser.
Hello, and thanks for joining us here on this Wednesday morning. I'm Ryan Pelesuji, joined by Yanji Denise, and this is Spotlight Hawaii on the digital platforms of the Honolulu Star-Advertiser. Yanji, we always have a lot to talk about with this guest, so we're going to jump right in.
Yeah, we are heading over to Honolulu Hale, speaking this morning with Honolulu Mayor Rick Blangiardi. He had some big news this morning about rail and opening even before he announced it was going to open in his State of the City address. But before we get to that, Mr. Mayor, we want to welcome you and talk about the budget. Thanks for being here today.
No, thank you, Yanji. Ryan, always look forward to the show. Probably one of the more challenging half hours I get to have in any given month.
Well, we want to dive right into the budget. You are in the midst of those negotiations. You've proposed a pretty robust budget, and the City Council is saying they want to give you less money than you had asked for. Tell us about where you see the major sticking points between you and the Council on what you've proposed.
Well, we're going to bring in Andy Kawano in a second, who's our Director of Budget and Fiscal Services, to talk more appropriately. But, I don't know if there's sticking points. I think we've come to, the $200 million increase we had in operating over a year ago was really all designed towards what we want to get done with respect to housing and salary increases and people. So, we have kind of a philosophical negotiation going on here on priorities, but at the end of the day, I feel very confident of what we've set out and the reasons why we want to do what we want to do, and we're still very much in that talking and give and take stage. But our last two budgets have been approved unanimously by City Council. So this is all part of the drill. I understand it. We've got our overall budget up to $4.5 billion. Now, and that's not a small amount of money, so it only stands to reason we were having these discussions. But I think there's a lot of understanding about what we need to do to be able to make sure we can deliver and improve upon core city services. We've talked openly and at length about the salary, about the vacancies rather that we have in the city, and this is designed to help shore up some of those vacancies. I'd like to introduce Andy Kawano, who is not only our Director of Budget and Fiscal Services, but he's been with us from day one, and he's a tireless worker. He's absolutely brilliant, and he can probably give you the best perspective on where we are up to this moment right now with the City Council.
Yeah, if I could just jump in, Director Kawano, and ask you specifically, what are some of the negotiations or some of the sticking points that you are continuing to talk with council members about? The mayor just mentioned some of those vacancies and making that decision to fill those vacancies or use that for more tax-related relief. What are some of the discussions that are happening right now with those council members?
Yeah, to your point, Ryan, definitely the council members are looking for savings within our budget because beyond fiscal year 2024, they want to look for permanent relief back to taxpayers. They explained to us that they'd like to address taxpayers that are long-term renters and find a way to provide them relief. They want to enrich in the low-income tax credit that we currently have in place. And they also want to do something for kupuna, the elderly generation who are on fixed incomes. So we're talking through those concerns that they have right now. And they're combing through our budget that they received early in March. Council goes through 3 full council readings of the budget. Between those full council readings, we have special committee on budget meetings to go through the budget in more with a fine-tooth comb, so to speak, and to answer council questions. They have in their first council draft reduced salaries across all agencies, and we're working with them to restore the salary reductions. Because as was discussed earlier, we're trying to fill vacancies so that we have the capacity and capability to provide core services to the public.
Yeah, and Mr. Mayor, to that point, I mean, every time we speak to you, I feel like you talk about how important this is to really the core of your administration, staffing up the cities, so that we can have the services that residents expect. When we had Chair Waters on here, he really laid this out as a, sort of a philosophical difference and a choice between the two. We could have permanent tax relief, or we could have a fully staffed city. Do you think there's a way for us to actually have both?
I do. And look, I remain ever the optimist, but also there's a lot of business principles at play. So let me say, first of all, with respect to longer-term tax relief, especially as it relates to our kapuna or people in the lower socioeconomic bracket, this year we did what we could. This was an aberration this year. For the first time, retail sales spiked well over $10 billion, went to 12.4. Ordinarily, it averages around 7. We did what we could. We provided a $300 exemption that resulted in $86,000 additional to the $100,000 that the 152,000 homeowners get. That was a $45.5 million give back, if you will. But we need something longer term to kind of prevent these things. I think we can look for that. There's a lot of money in that budget on what we can do. But at the same time, I come back and say that part of the city's challenges, if you will, has been, and part of the compromise has been in not having enough manpower. Much gets said about the shortage in our police department and the ramifications of that. But that's also true in parks and recreation, facilities maintenance, where we're out there trying to, fix roads and whatever, and a number of other departments. And it takes people. So we made a long-term commitment. We're running slightly ahead. There was an article in your paper this week talking about that. There's a lot to overcome. It's a tough labor market out there. But I'd like to think, because all of this requires a rethink of the whole thing, that rather than take the easy cuts and just say it's neither or, I think it's more complex than that. And I think if we start to think in terms of redesign, not unlike what I talked about the state of the city, we challenged our housing department, we challenged DPP, including land management, we're challenging our EMS services with fire and ocean safety as well on organizational restructuring. So too, it's this. It shouldn't have to come down to one or the other. At the end of the day, we've got some time on the long-term tax exemptions, and I don't think that should come from our operating numbers for fiscal year 24. And that's, we've done everything we could for this coming year. And in fact, it was historic. The $300 was an historic amount. It had only been done once before, but we did it in response to the surprise that everybody felt at the increased valuations. So,
you talked about, Director Kawano had explained sort of the process, and each department had, going through with a fine-tooth comb, trying to figure out what that budget would look like for each of the departments. Knowing that, and as these discussions continue, are there any specific departments that you are afraid may see any significant cuts, whether it be reduction in positions, size, overall funding? Are there any specific areas within the city government and operations that the city council and their proposals may be looking to take a little bit more out of?
I'm going to defer to Andy on that off the top, because right now I've not been apprised of anything like that specifically. It's a very good question, Ryan.
I don't think the council members are singling out any one department or any groups of departments. They're looking at they look at our vacancies, and they're attempting to identify which vacancies have been unfilled for long periods of time. So I'm talking about several years. So they're looking for situations like that. We have been responding back to city council members, and we've been explaining to them that even though vacancies have been unfilled for a number of years, we need the budget dollars, because we're constantly in hiring mode right now. We're working on hiring efficiencies to get back to candidates sooner, and we're looking at hiring on a much broader scope than we've done in more recent years. We had heavily restricted budgets during COVID and in 2021, 2022. And, it's actually probably exacerbated the vacancy situation in recent years, and we're in the process right now of turning the curve and building momentum to build the capacity and capability that we need to provide services.
Yeah, and let me just add to that. Recruiting for the city is not necessarily easy. First of all, we really haven't had much of a past practice of recruiting. Cities was sort of notorious in not doing that, and not only that, there weren't really even a lot of lines when you talk about the salary increases we're proposing for other staff for retention and development, and for that matter, really, quite honestly, almost nothing in succession planning. 3 core things you would have in running any enterprise, especially one that's greater than 10,000 people, to have a recruiting vehicle, to be involved with recruitment and detention and development and succession planning. Those will void. And now you come up to the fact that we've got the kind of openings we have. Tough labor market right now. Everybody knows that. I've talked with the unions of late. Not easy for anybody trying to find qualified people. Add to that the liability, if you will, of our existing workforce. More than 15% of those people are past the age of retirement. And I've never worked in a situation before where so many people retire. Really good people who've worked here for a long time with great institutional knowledge, very proud, have made great contributions. They've earned that, and it's time for them to leave. And so you're up against that as well. So, it's the idea of we can lighten up on that. This is an ongoing challenge, one of which we've decided to take on. I talked about in the state of city on the wicked problems, and we can talk about housing and homelessness, and we're going to talk about the rail in a little bit and some of the other things we've done, but we didn't even include staffing in that. But staffing is absolutely critical to the success of our city, not only in the short term, but on going forward. So we're interested in giving people career opportunities, just like many of these people are retiring, and not just jobs. It's not that transactional, and we need the resources to do that.
Director Kawano, we do need to move on to rail in just a minute, but before we let you go, I do want to ask, it sounds to me what you're describing is what the mayor's office seems to be asking for, and of course you're advocating for that as well, is flexibility, right? That even though those jobs haven't been filled for a few years, you want that those funds available so that you have the flexibility to use them to do the kind of hiring initiatives that the mayor is talking about. How would you describe the negotiations that are happening right now? Do you feel that they are productive? Do you feel that the council members are coming to you, and their staff, with earnest intention, if you will? I mean, do you see this as, a death match? How would you characterize these negotiations?
No, it's not a death match. We are working together. I think what we're going through right now is more of an education process. They need to understand why we need the flexibility when we hire. Hiring is a very dynamic process. If you have, let's say you're a medium-sized department and you have 100 vacancies, if council members restrict 50, so they take it back and they decide to repurpose the dollars for those vacant positions for other purposes, be it tax relief or maybe a council add to a program or something like that, you have half the capacity to hire. And what that does is it restricts the amount of positions that you can go after, because you cannot overextend yourself. If you overextend your hiring and you don't have the budget in the next fiscal year to pay for the employees, it's going to cause all kinds of problems, including having to let people go. So we're explaining to council members that we need all of these vacancies as much as possible that they're willing to provide, so that we can carry out mayor's priorities. And one of the priorities is to hire, capable staff and talent, so that we can move the city into the future and provide much better services to the public. And the public's continuing to ask for more service, better service.
Yeah, one of the things I can tell you, and we'll probably talk.
It costs money.
Yeah, and people know that. We've now completed 8 town halls, and maybe we'll talk about that later. But I would tell you, across the board in all the various districts we've been in, they've been really consistent about that and supportive of that as well. So, we're just trying to serve the public. So it's not a death match. I don't even know if it's a philosophical disagreement. It's kind of a reorientation, if you will, to our line of thinking versus how things have been done historically here at the city.
Well, Director Kawano, thank you for joining us. We're going to move on. Unless, you're welcome to comment about the rail too. I don't know what how the mayor
Well, I'll let the mayor do that.
Yeah, Andy can talk about anything all day long. He's great. Thank you, Andy.
Thank you so much,
thank you
Director.
very much.
Mayor, if we can sort of come back into the announcement that you made this morning, an earlier date, if you will, for the beginning of services for rail. How was this decision made? How confident are you? Obviously, you gave a date, and so there's got to be some level of confidence that this thing is going to finally be rolling here.
Yeah, I know much was said about Lori. I think it happened on your show here at Spotlight, gasping, if you will, when she heard at the State of the City. I decided to put a stake in the ground by July, but I didn't do that capriciously. It wasn't done in a vacuum. We've been meeting with Hartford and John Nowuchi and Roger Morton and everybody involved, including the Hart board, weekly for the last couple of years, listening clearly and closely to the progress that was being made, even with respect to the modifications that had to be, and some of the remediation work on the pillars and stuff and what we were getting done. And it seemed very confident to me because of the testing and everything else that was going on, that we could start in July. And so sure enough, we announced this morning on this historic and momentous day for this island of Oahu that we're going to begin rail service on June 30th. And by 2:00 in the afternoon that day, and for the next 4 days throughout the 4th of July weekend, our residents will be able to come and ride for free. The line is going to open up obviously from East Kapolei to Aloha Stadium, but we want people to sample it. But I'm really pleased. I understand that on social media, a lot of people were in disbelief that July would never happen. But this is what happens if you know what you're doing in here. We should know what we're doing. This was a good call, and I'm very pleased we're going to start it. Actually, for the first time in a long time, we're delivering and doing something on time that we said we're going to get done, even a day earlier. But I'm not going to split hairs about June 30th to July 1. The fact is, we're starting.
What are your anticipations when it comes to ridership and what you hope this will do for traffic? We know that, this is not opening to the urban core just yet, but how much of an impact do you hope this will have?
Yeah, well, for one thing, let me just say about the efficiency, because I think that when people sample this, they're going to be really surprised. The trains are going to come every 10 minutes, and from East Kapolei to Aloha Stadium, it's a 21-minute ride. Now, it took me 35 minutes to come back from Aloha Stadium today to get to Honolulu Hale after I left the opening, and we all know the unpredictability of roads. So that in and of itself is going to be good, albeit it's limited because. So we said this morning that in 2 years, in the summer of 25, we'll be to Middle Street. That'll get us past the two big employment centers of Pearl Harbor and the airport. But right now, as I listened to Roger Morton today and the rollout on the numbers that we have, I think we're estimating about 10,000 riders a day from this East Kapolei to Aloha Stadium based on what we currently serve on our bus lines, because that's a very active bus route. Then by the time we get to Middle Street, it'll jump to about 25,000 riders a day. And then when we get to full service, somewhere in the latter part of this decade, it'll be about 85,000 a day. And everything has been mapped out that way. I think that people are going to be, and I can tell you just from this morning, because we had the trains open, they went in there and they were really surprised at how big they are and how clean they are and how beautiful the station is. This is going to be something that I've said all along, and it's not original thought. This is a transformative project for this island. This is something that I think people are going to be surprised by, not only the efficiency of it, but the effectiveness of it, if you will, and what it does to help us transport people and maybe eliminate the burden. I'm not going to make any predictions on cars off the road. This is a place where we have more cars registered than actually residents. I know the preponderance of cars out there, but for those people who choose to take the rail, this is going to be a very efficient means of getting from one place to the other. And it's only going to increase that way as time goes on. And let me just say one other thing. On projects like this, which is why we phase it, and that's why it worked well with the FTA to bring them back into construction partners, there'll be a phase 2 to this. I hope we get to plan on it over the course of the next 5.5 years. I think that we will. And that hopefully gets us to minimum to Ala Moana and certainly 3 or 4 stations, maybe 4, deeper into Kapolei as the population out there only increases. But this is one of those things that we've never had here before, but I'm really proud to say compared to other cities, especially having spent a lot of time on public transportation in the Northeast. This is modern. It's 21st century. It's the first of its kind and riderless and all electric. It's beautiful. And it just, I think people are going to really grow to appreciate it.
I want to switch gears because we don't have that much time left, but there's a lot of topics we want to discuss. And one of those is Red Hill, that you joined the governor as well as other state officials yesterday at a press conference asking, really coming together as a united front, talking about the issue of Red Hill. If you can briefly just describe what's different about what happened yesterday and you folks coming together, and how do you hold the military accountable? Because there still seems to be a level of issues with transparency and certain information that they're withholding. After talking with Ernie Lau on this program, he mentioned there's still things that they're waiting for information on. How do you hope this gathering yesterday changes things?
Yeah, well, let's go back to the military first of all, because my comments were that, this doesn't have to be an adversarial situation, which people constantly want to kind of sort of pit this. Look, the military has been very quick at the highest levels, and I've been briefed from the highest levels, all the way from Secretary Del Toro to Admiral Aguilino here in charge of Indo-PACOM, to Admiral Wade, who's in charge now of defueling the tanks, and so on multiple occasions. And these are people who are at the highest level of their careers and the highest level of the military, that at some point you have to trust in that. So when people talk about the lack of accountability, these men, from everything we've been told, I've been told, especially in the debriefings we had, are going to do everything possible they can to safely and timely defuel the tanks at Red Hill. And I want to believe in that. And we have ongoing dialogue. And they've been the first to admit, many mistakes have been made. And there's been breakdowns in communication. And quite honestly, I think historically, it's been kind of a top-down mindset. The Department of Defense, we tell you whatever. Red Hill's been a game changer in that regard because it's had a lot of exposure. And so the people that are left there haven't really caused that, but they're left now to fix it. I think we need to work collaboratively, which is a segue into tomorrow. I think that the plans are all underway and things are proceeding on the defueling, the safe defueling of the tanks at Red Hill. What yesterday was about, and the nuance here, is about beyond that. It's about the fact that, we are dependent on Oahu, especially 100% on our aquifers to provide us clean drinking water. And so while the task at hand, in the short term, if you will, over the next couple of years to defuel the tanks, maybe not that long, to get that done, what are we doing to make sure that, and with the military involved, that we are going to have safe drinking water? And there we stand united on a long-term projection of what happens after defueling. There's been a lot of stuff going on. We got the issue now of PFAS coming in and other things that we're dealing with, and what that means. At the end of the day, and it's one of the things that I said in my own, there's no greater priority. This is the stuff of life, and so everybody understands that. And so really, I come to a place now where it's about us working together as government leaders, about us working collaboratively with the military, about holding each other accountable, not just us on them, but more than anything, when I say each other accountable, for the end of what we're trying to get done, which is to ensure for this island, both now and for future generations, clean drinking water. So much of this job is predicated on the future. I just got done talking about the future of rail, and now we're talking about the future of water. And now you find yourself in these moments in elected roles, very important roles. I don't take lightly 1 second my responsibility as the mayor, city, and county, and what it means to the people who live here, to come together to make sure we exhaust all of our energies to the best of our ability. That's what yesterday was about. Is that, we're going to collaborate in a way unprecedented to ensure we can deliver on that very critical deliverable, which is clean drinking water.
I want to ask you another financial question, this having to do with raises at the council and for your office, as well as department heads, salary commission, of course, stirring up some controversy by proposing these raises for the city council members. Theirs is the most significant, over 60%. Tommy Waters on this program talked about sort of the challenge for the council and having to, he doesn't want to necessarily bring these to a vote and sort of let them be adopted, if you will, just on their own, because it is, a difficult position for the council members to be in, to be voting on their own salary increases. And that's right. Probably why so many of them have been denied in the past. But what are your thoughts on, first of all, the way this is structured and the awkwardness of that, and also the increases themselves? Are they appropriate at this time?
Well, I mentioned a few moments ago that we've now done 8 town halls, and one of the things that I'm proud of, and one of the things that has been reminded by people in the audience, is the way that we have an open mic. We don't have you submit a written question, go through and decide to answer what you want. People can come up and ask us anything that they want. What I tell them is you may not get the answer you want to hear because we're here to tell you the truth, but certainly have at it. And I will tell you this issue of salary raises didn't come up one time until last week in Wailua. Came up by one person for the first time. So I'm going to try to answer your question, Yunji, is the way I answered that person. First of all, I've got nothing to do with the city council from the standpoint of what they requested and the percentage of that raise. We're outside of that. I have been discouraged over the fact, though, that has been mischaracterized. In fact, reading a lot of things in the Star-Advertiser, both by columnists and letters to the editors, there's a lot of people who don't understand what happened here at the city. So let me just speak as mayor on behalf of my team. In 2020, Mayor Caldwell waived any raises, understandably at budget time because they were in a COVID setting 3 years ago today, understandably. And we came in 21 and 22, and I waived raises in both of those years, which went 3 straight years, those positions didn't receive any increase. A lot of people forget because people have short memories of what it was like in November and December of 2020 when we were putting together a cabinet, and the fear and the uncertainty that was out there. We didn't even have any conversations about vaccines and the quality of men and women who left good jobs in many cases, despite all that uncertainty, to come and become members of our cabinet. And I've now worked with those people for nearly 2.5 years, and I've seen how hard they work. And so by charter, they come to the mayor and they ask, are you going to submit for raises? And I said, this year I would, because I know how hard they've worked. I know the sacrifice. And quite honestly, those positions haven't moved financially, and to do it for yet again another year wasn't warranted. I didn't put any numbers down on a page. It was all I could do is encourage the salary commission. I've had nothing to deal with the salary commission until now, other than the appointments that we made, 2 appointments that I am responsible for 4, but there were 2 already in place. So they're the ones that came up with 12.5%, which is a little bit less than the 14.5% or 14.6% that I think civil service workers have earned throughout that time. As I said last week, and I say again, this is a good team of men and women. They sacrifice much. They have families too. Not everybody's in my age bracket, and they work really hard. Salary Commission proposed that. It was challenged. They relooked at it. They didn't change anything. They voted on it. It was 5-1, and I think it's very deserving of for our team. And I've said all along, I'm not going to blink when it comes to my team because I have already lost a couple of people because of financial. I talked earlier about how difficult it is to recruit in this market. I'm talking to somebody right now to replace somebody I lost because of money, Don Savchek, who went off, who was our head of the Department of Facilities Maintenance, a tremendous engineer, great leader, really like it. And the person I'm talking to is going to have to take a really significant pay cut, and they're making that money, and they're managing 30 people, and I need somebody to come in here to run 600 to 800 people, our largest department. And they're talking about a pay cut. I probably shouldn't even get into this on this call, but it's substantial. But they feel the call to public service. I've relied on that. So the last thing I'm going to do after 2 years of waiving their raises and a highly performing, hardworking group of people to do it 3 years in a row. And so the salary commission says 12.5%. It's less than what people who are earning civil service, and that's the way I see it. And so we stand behind that.
We only have a few moments left, and I want to allow you just one final word, but I'm wondering if we can also tie in just what you're hearing from the town hall. You say that nobody brought in or brought up this subject of salaries, but what have you, in these discussions that you've had in the town hall, what has been the most talked about or the topic that has come up the most?
It's been refreshing in the sense that, even though I'm really concerned about it, is that people bring up recreation. Last week when we were out in Wailua, they talked about their beaches and their parks. When we were in Laie, it was all about needing a swimming pool. Even brought the cuckoo swimming coach in a gymnasium for the community. You think, boy, these are long-standing communities which are now on the North Shore is about 25,000 people, but it's even a broader community than that. And so they wanted to talk in almost every setting, Waipahu and Waianae and Eva, about recreational facilities. And so that's been good because there's some real inroads that we can make there at helping with that. The sessions themselves have been very constructive, and they've gotten bigger and bigger by the week. In fact, last week at Wailua, we had standing room only, and people were outside the building listening in. So feel pretty good about that. I think that, most people just want us to do a good job for them. And they're really, look, I want to say this, our cabinet has come to every meeting. They're there to provide that expertise and that ongoing connection and the follow-up that we're asking them to do, because we want to answer every question and stop people from feeling like they've got to go through a bureaucracy that they can't get help on. And I'm really proud of that. And I think that people see that respect that we're showing the communities. And I'm really proud of my team. And not one person, for the record, as I close on our people and about the raises, going back to that, Yunji, not one time has anybody come in here in the last 2.5 years and complained to me about money they're making, or for that matter, when we asked them to do this for 11 weeks on Thursday nights, not one person's come in and said, I can't do it, you're asking too much of me, or anything like that. So, after 3 years of working together, I said, yeah, I believe you guys deserve a raise. Didn't know what that number was going to be, and I stand by what's been recommended by the Salary Commission.
It's past 11 o'clock. The time with you goes so quickly, so we have to let you go. But before we do, we'd love a final thought. We covered a lot of ground today talking about the city budget and, of course, your big announcement today on rail and some of the other issues that we just covered now. But what's your final message to folks who are watching this morning?
I think my final message is, I'm sorry to speak over you, Yunji, is we're all inspired by the people who live here to do a good job for them. And that's everything that we're trying to do, is to tee ourselves up so we can provide a great service and make this a great place to live. One of the things that really concerns me, and should all of us, is this out-migration, especially out-migration of young people. And we need to do everything we possibly can to give people a quality of life who stay here, work hard, and sacrifice to live here and living here. And that's why the recreational stuff is really important. But at the end of the day, I'm excited because I'm starting to see now, really only a year plus into it, because COVID was such a huge distraction for our first 14 months. We've only been in office for 20 months. I'm starting to see traction now. I'm starting to see this team realize its potential in making things happen. And that's why the budget's so critical too, because you can't run a big city like this without having the proper financing. But at the end of the day, I'm really confident in what we're going to get done.
All right, Honolulu Mayor Rick Blangiardi, thank you so much for taking time with us this morning. Always great talking to you, and we even had a guest join us this morning as well. So we never know what we're going to get when we get over there to Honolulu Hale. Thanks so much, Mayor.
Thank you.
Aloha.
Well, great to talk to him, and it was wonderful for him to bring on the Honolulu Budget and Fiscal Services Director, Andy Kawano, to talk about just some of the negotiations that are happening right now. And you heard about that sort of push-pull between priorities from the council and priorities from the mayor's office. Director Kawano really laying out that these departments need flexibility when it comes to hiring. And that kind of goes to what the mayor talked about at the end, people wanting recreation, wanting services in their communities. That's what he's hearing from the town halls. And he's saying that, if the city is to provide those services, they need the staff. And so to have the staff, they need the money. He does say that having permanent tax relief along with the staffing, those two things are not mutually exclusive. Those negotiations really are going on right now, pretty critical. So we'll have to see what shakes out.
Yeah, and just getting a pulse of how those negotiations are going, it sounds like things continue to move forward in a productive manner. We heard from both of them saying that this is not something that is a brutal negotiation between two sides that are trying to come together and find the middle. This is more of a conversation of changing the mentality and the mindset of how this city budget will be operated and performed moving forward, recognizing the critical services that the city provides, but also looking forward into the future about how they can continue to provide this while also, as the mayor continues to say on this program, really investing in the personnel and people that work within the city government, recognizing that there is a large population of those individuals who are reaching the age or at the age of retirement, and making sure that these individuals are taking with them this institutional knowledge, but also passing it along to those who are maybe coming up the ranks within each department. So really trying to make an investment not only into these vacant positions, but as you heard here towards the end, making a case for the reason why members of his cabinet and administration should receive some of these raises that have been set forth by the Salary Commission.
Yeah, and of course, the other big news today, the mayor's office announcing that rail will be ready to ride on June 30th. That is a tiny bit ahead of schedule. He did promise July, so we're happy to see that. Of course, the train has been under so much criticism really since its inception, and so it will be very interesting to see what the ridership looks like once that does get rolling. He was right that Lori Kahikina did say that she gasped on this program. She told us she gasped when the mayor said that it was going to be July, but now it is going to be June 30th. They're hoping for 10,000 riders a day, and hopefully that does alleviate some traffic. And he did say that once people really see it and really experience it firsthand, he does think a lot of the criticism and the thinking around the project will change.
Yeah, and we noticed that there are some questions from people specifically about the rail. We will be speaking to Lori Kahikita as well as other city officials as the state gets closer to prepare riders and give information about how these routes will be managed with the integration with, of course, not only the rail, but the bus line system. So we encourage you to stay connected to us here on the platforms of the Honolulu Star-Advertiser for updates for those next shows, because we'll definitely be able to dive a little deeper into some of the logistics and some of the specific question with regards to HART and the different rails.
Yeah, always great to talk to the mayor. We really appreciate his time, and we really appreciate, as you noted, that he brought on a special surprise guest for us as well. On Wednesday, not Wednesday, today is Wednesday. On Friday, we will be talking to Tia Roberts-Hartsock. She's the executive director of the Office of Wellness and Resilience. That's a new office that the governor had put in place really to deal with the sort of mental health and psychological trauma, integrating different offices, the Department of Health within our law enforcement system, our punishment system, and seeing how that all can be integrated together. We're the first state in the nation to have this kind of office. What does that entail? How do you measure success? And why is this a priority for the governor? We're going to be talking about that on Friday right here at 10:30.
We'll see you then. Aloha.